So the dog and I are out here in Glenorchy going across this disused rail bridge that used to take carriages out to the zinc works and the fertiliser plant and the abattoir that used to be there. It's pretty hammered. There haven't been any trains on it for a long time, and there's probably never going to be any ever again. It's one of these places in Greater Hobart that has an almost mystical quality to it. It says a lot about the uniqueness of Greater Hobart. This bridge here in Glenorchy used to be different. There weren't trucks and buses and motorbikes and cars going on underneath. There was a whole lot of water, and there were boats and there were fish. Different ways of moving things across the Derwent River at the Bridgewater crossing. In 1891, a plate girder span bridge was built exclusively for trains. In 1946, it was replaced by a steel vertical lift bridge taking rails plus road carriage. The older bridge was dismantled and craned away, where it was erected on concrete pillars in the depth of Glenorchy, across the place where the Brooker Highway would later be built. It was still being used in the 1990s. That train made several stops. One of them was at the Lutana train station. Very little of that ruin is left now. So what we've got here is this bit of electrical box. It's had its chest ripped out. In most places around Hobart, it wouldn't be left like this. The wires might be made safe and then it'd be taken down. But it's one of these things about Glenorchy that's interesting because it has all this old junk lying around. It's not exactly pretty, but one might argue that it's something better than being pretty. It's interesting. It's a signal, a souvenir from the past. Tasmania's population's about 570, 580,000, and Hobart's population is like 250, 270,000. Hobart's unique in the country in that it's a capital city belonging to a state where the majority of the population don't actually live in the capital. It's different everywhere else. Glenorchy has like 50,000 people, so what, that's like let's say a fifth of the population of Hobart, or a tenth of the population of Tasmania. It's not a lot of people, it's not, but it's not just the people that exist now that make up Hobart, it's all the people that were here before and all the things that they did. They come along, they do some stuff, and then they're gone. And even if you give somebody a grave, or you put up a plaque, or maybe even a statue to somebody, all that stuff can be taken down and erased. Some of the stuff, the more or less official stuff that's left behind by a person, the work that they did, can live on for a long time. And this embankment, what is it? It's not much. It doesn't really have any use anymore. There's a busted old retaining wall down that way next to a train line that is essentially useless now, but it's here because a bunch of people at some point put all this effort in to build it. Cities are human places. They're built by people. They don't just exist. They're not spots on maps. They are places that have been adjusted by humans for humans. Now, some of the things that people do to make them more livable fall out of date and you don't need them anymore, but you get left with all these remnants. And a remnant, something that's built by a person, is at a push. You don't want to push it too far, but it's like a magical ghost. It's still here, even if you don't know that it's there. It's something that's hard to articulate, but I suspect you might know what I mean. So over there we've got the tractor. In the far distance, that's Mount Direction. So the river, the Derwent, is between the land that we can see and then the hill, mountain above that. All this around here, it's green space, and it's, I guess, the difference between green space and natural space. There ain't much natural about this at all. You have to use this bloke on a big piece of farm equipment to turn the soil over and make it nice so that you can play sport on it. The other thing about this place is that the land isn't natural itself. This whole area behind us has been the subject of land reclamation. It's one of the defining features of Hobart and Glenorchy, and the Goodwood area of Glenorchy, of Greater Hobart, is that it's been adjusted over time by pouring soil and rocks and stones and old bits of building into the river so that you've got more usable land. It's been a big success. An older photo before the Brooker Highway was completed shows the landscape differently, with streams of water flowing naturally through it and out to sea. The bay is filled with fish and birds, broken pipes and bits of trash. There is still a slither of natural sand. There was a time when citizens came down to the shores to bathe, holding regattas. So up there you can see just how high the land reclamation needed to be to make the sports fields flat. Here we're walking on top of the exit of the rivulet that used to run through the Derwent Park area of Glenorchy, empty out into the Derwent River. Now I'm pro-industry. I have no expectations that you can have a civilised city living in a place that doesn't have some level of pollution. Things are improving all the time though. This place used to be a lot dirtier, but still you can't go for a swim in the river here. The dog and I ain't about to go for a dip as much as we might like to. Maybe one day, maybe like 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, this will all be different. There'll be people having picnics here and there'll be kids and their parents paddling about. You don't know what the future holds, but things will probably continue to get a bit better if we focus our energy in that direction. I think if Hobart had been built differently, if you were to know everything that we know now, you'd build it very differently. And one of the things that you would do is you would not put all of the industry in and around Prince of Wales Bay, because geographically it's just so nice. It's a very calm, very beautiful natural harbour, and that was not to be, so you just have to deal with things as they are. You know? Things began with the zinc works being established in 1916, a space so important to the development of the capital that it needs to be explained elsewhere. There's also the fertiliser plant, the sewage disposal site, the waste transfer station, that tip having been built in a former quarry. Back in 1908, the Hobart City Council acquired land to build an abattoir. The Derwent Park abattoir is gone now. Prince of Wales Bay Marine Precinct. Marine engineering specialist Taylor Brothers was established in 1936. During World War II, more than 100 vessels were delivered in the bay. In 1989, Incat moved to Prince of Wales to expand production. Around 20 businesses within the precinct are involved in shipbuilding. For decades, the bay itself was a dumping ground for busted boats. They weren't so much as run aground there, but rather parked and allowed to sink, resting in the shallower places.
Children used to go out and get up onto them and run around and go inside them. Giblin's Reserve is the main open space with public access to the foreshore. There are public toilets and playgrounds. It's been established on reclaimed land flat enough to play basketball.
There's quite a lot going on in Prince of Wales Bay these days. There's all this commercial interest, this light industry, and then there's all this residential stuff all stuck together in a way that's unique to Glenorchy. But for a long time, there wasn't much going on. The English had settled the place and it was a colony. And there were allocations for farming land put down here. And there was a few houses, but that was about it. And that was like that for quite a while. But then, in the 1800s, something emerged, and that occurred in a vacuum. The English went back, and Tasmanians, as we are now, all on our own. The British, when they left, took their military with them, so we had to form our own sort of army. And something that occurred down here was exercises from the Hobart Town Volunteer Artillery Corps. This was a bunch of blokes that got together with pretty primitive weapons and did exercises. One of the things that they were afraid of was Russian invasion. The Crimean War had scared everybody in all of the British colonies. And there was a fear, a genuine fear. People felt it. The fear was real, even if the reality was probably not real, that Russia could come up the harbour and take the place over. So these guys got ready for that, basically. That didn't come, but what they were involved with was something that's maybe even more interesting and is definitely more forgotten about, and that is something called the Bushrangers War. The Bushrangers War is now a part of history that we know about. In retrospect, we've identified it as being a thing, but at the time, it was just part of life. But now we can look back and see it as a piece of history.
The Hobart Town Volunteer Artillery Company was formed in 1860. It was one of the earliest volunteer military units in the colony. It saw active service during the Tasmanian Bushrangers War, 1861 to 1865. A Bushranger's Reverie, a drawing by Thomas Midwood, depicted the life cycle of a bushranger: murder, capture, prison, sentence, and end. But one bushranger in particular was never executed. Perhaps the most famous of these bushrangers was Martin Cash. He, like most famous criminals in Australia, is famous not so much for the crimes that they committed, but because of their media. As was someone like Chopper Read, who published several books and had a movie made of his life. Cash had an autobiography, Ghost, written by James Lester Burke. The Adventures of Martin Cash, published in 1870, portrays him in a sympathetic light. It became a bestseller, but no one reads that book anymore, yet he's still sort of famous. He has a motel on the main road named after him. Martin Cash was one of the few bushrangers to die both a free man and of old age. He kicked the bucket in his bed. The house where he didn't wake up in is still there, in one of the hollows of Glenorchy, towards the end of Montrose Road, hidden behind the trees, the building altered with time. Glenorchy is filled with homes of significance. Some remain. Many more are now gone, making way for the new people who come along. Claremont High School was established in 1961, catering for kids from years 7 to 10. In 2011, it merged with Rosetta High School to become Montrose Bay High School. The original crescent moon sign of Claremont High is no longer standing, laid flat on its back, hidden within the plants. Before all of this, the place had held home to John Pascoe Fawkner. He was born in London in 1792. As a 10-year-old, he, along with his mother and younger sister, accompanied their convict father, who had been sentenced to 14 years jail for receiving stolen goods. In time, the family acquired a farm, which they worked with a few tools and no animals. As an adult, and after years of abuse from the authorities, Fawkner managed to sail away to modern-day Victoria and found the now city of Melbourne. Melbourne is still a place that some young Tasmanians feel the need to escape towards.
So just over there is a stone, and that's supposed to be where the Fawkner home once was. Maybe it was in a slightly different spot. You've got to build roads and roundabouts, so maybe things were adjusted a little bit as was necessary. The home itself was in a terrible state, so it was pulled down. And when it was pulled down, it wasn't really regarded as something super important or historically significant, if only it was. One might assume that the wood that it was made of was either taken down to a field and burnt there, or maybe it was put into a furnace in a factory, or maybe it was used inside someone's home to keep them warm for the night. But whatever happened, that wood was turned into smoke, and that smoke was lifted up into the air.